So as I mentioned previously, the user within Resource Loader has to set the first scene for the game. So right here, I'm having it set it to a scene called null scene. Null scene is a derived scene from the user defined and also derived from the scene base class. So just to give a better overview of how scenes and the scene manager work. So within the main game loop, within the engine's update, it calls update on the scene manager through an attorney. So this just calls update on the an update within the scene manager. So I'll pull up scene manager. It's a singleton. It's essentially responsible for keeping track of the current scene as well as changing scenes. Um, so here I'm keeping track of the current scene. I have a couple tokens. These are essentially help with the scene changing process. Um, this hasn't been fully implemented. I took it out a while ago. But yeah, so when update gets called within the engine, it calls update on the not time manager, on the scene manager calls update on the scene manager, and then what happens is the scene manager first checks to see if it received a new request to change scenes. Um, if not, it's not. If there isn't one, it's not going to do anything. That's going to be the null scene command. Um, Otherwise, it's going to change scenes. And after that happens, it'll then call the update on the current scene. So, jumping over into the base class for scene. So each scene is responsible for holding all of its ubble managers. So it keeps track of its drawable manager, updatable manager, alarmable, etc. All these camera manager is another multi-ton that it keeps track of. Um, yeah. So current scene calls update. Within scene, what happens is, well, first it all of the new registration commands and yeah, all of the registration deregistration commands are executed, um, and then it processes all of the other registered objects, um, depending on what they're registered to. So the things that are registered to alarm manager to be alarmable will get processed in process alarm input manager. I'll talk more about this when I'm discussing the ubbles, but basically this is responsible for going through all the registered items and processing them however necessary. Um, so yeah, that's the update. Um, it's also responsible for drawing, as I kind of offhandedly mentioned. Same thing, just as update. It calls the draw on the current scene, and that will then process all of the drawable elements. And yeah. Um, so yeah. So that's essentially what the scene manager is used for. Um, so just to give more in-depth look into update and all that stuff. So when update gets called on the scene, oh wait, no, not update, sorry. um, Initialization. So a user-defined scene, it has two user defined methods, initialized and terminate. Um, so within initialize, the user is responsible for creating all of their game objects and instantiating all of the setting up all of the collision pairs. So in all scene, this just shows off here. I'm just creating a plain game object, and then in terminate, user defined terminate, I'm destroying it, and then I'm just cleaning everything up within the delete of the user defined scene. An example of enemy scene, yeah. So let me pull up enemy scene. Just a small example of collision initiation within the initialize method of the scene. So here's another user-defined scene. Within their initialization, I'm creating all of my objects. I'm setting up all of my collision pairs, and then within terminate, I'm cleaning everything up, deregistering and clearing all my active for all of my factories and singletons, and then just doing one final cleanup within the actual deletion of the scene. Yes. Okay. So I lightly touched on the whole scene changing, but I can go into more detail. So, as I mentioned, I have 3 tokens used for scene changing. Scene change, which is scene change command base, which is the base command used for scene changing. Is that it? No. Scene changing. Registration, scene change. Okay. So it's I'm just using the command pattern. Let me pull this over here. So these 3 are essentially commands. The current token is, it gets called within the update, as I previously showed you. Yeah, it just calls there. So this current token will either be set to a scene change command, which will actually set the next scene and then set all the necessary things in motion to actually change a scene, including cleaning up the registration calls, deleting the current scene while setting the next scene. So yeah, that's what I'm doing around here. So yeah, terminate scene. This is what closes down the scene. It calls all the deregisters everything essentially. Deletes it, and then I set the scene and then reset my current token to the null token. So yeah, that's scene manager and a bit of scene. I'm going to talk more about scene in more depth when I go over the ubbles and how the scene relates to registration and all of that stuff. Okay.